Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Strength Beyond Strength podcast, talk show, YouTube video, what have you. I'm sporting, for the people who can see it on the YouTube, this fantastic background that I, seconds before hit record, asked the AI to generate for me so that I wouldn't just have a blurred background. So I don't really like it, but I don't feel like changing it either. And today I am super stoked to have my new friend, Peter Nieman, on the show. Peter and I met in Nashville last November in person for the first time at Belfast. And I was aware of Peter because of the internet and social media and various things like associated with that. Knew he was a lifter. I knew of his handles, Icebox Kettlebell, and had been connected or running, seeing from across a crowded room on the internet for many years. Knew who he was, but was not expecting to meet him in person. So that was a pleasant surprise. And he's a kettlebell lifter, obviously. He is a bent press aficionado. He's coach, teaches people how to wield the kettlebell to make it an extension of themselves. Which I think is a beautiful way to put it. And I wanted to make sure that I said this. If we can look at it from the point of view of how much I fell in love. This is bent press specific stuff. I fell in love with the bent press 20 something years ago when I first was introduced to it in the early days of the RKC. Became quite smitten by the lift, and it is still my all-time favorite lift. And as the old-time strongmen have, many of them have said, is the king of lifts. The bent press is what caught my attention about Peter specifically. And some of the stuff that I've seen you do and the way that you promote the lift is very heartwarming to me, and it makes me feel good. So when we were at Belfast, I was speaking, presenting, demonstrating bent press, and um, the point being that Peter and I had different body types, and I was demonstrating it in the way that I do it. And I said, if you want to see somebody do it with a different body type who is exceptionally good at it, I pointed at Peter. I said, watch him, go follow him on social media and watch what he does. And you can see that it's a leverage lift. And Peter's quite good at it. So it was really cool to be able to meet face to face and to do some comparisons like that. So I'm rambling now. So Peter, thanks for being on the show.
Of course, it's good to be here, Dave.
And to the point of everything I was just saying, um, a while back, I was having a conversation in a comment section with Paul McIlroy. We were talking about bent pressing, and Paul, if you don't know who he is a genius. Anybody who knows me knows that I speak highly of Paul pretty much every episode. He's one of my mentors. He's a friend, fantastic guy all the way around. And in this conversation we were talking about the bent press. He threw out this kind of it was unexpected comment. And I say this not to toot my own horn or anything, but he said that he felt that I am the father of the modern bent press movement, and that I am one of the world's foremost authorities on the technical execution of it. And from someone of Paul's caliber to say that was a very, very well, meaningful thing to me. And I've thought about that, him saying that a lot. And when I met you, Peter, back in November, I realized that if that's true, if I'm the father of the modern movement, you are the next generation's number one son. You are bringing stuff to the table that I can see the thought process behind it, and it's similar enough to mine that I recognize how you got there, but I would have never seen that path to get to it myself. So the creativity and the coaching ability and just the love of the lift that you bring to it is very much a generational adoration and admiration kind of thing. So it makes me feel good to know that the stuff that I was doing 20 years ago that pebble is continuing to ripple out, and people are taking it and doing different things with it. So thank you for that. that's how I wanted to open today.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. Um, you've got 20 years on the lift. I've got about 10. And
Mhm.
I was just scrolling through YouTube one day. It's probably back in late 2015, early 2016. And Dave Whitley, there's two of them. You know your videos well, man. So the one of them is the 68, where I
Hmm.
was like, well, first of all, I didn't know they made kettlebells that big.
Hmm.
The biggest one I had access to at that point was 32 kilo, 70 pound,
Wow.
and I couldn't even swing it with both hands once back then. Just I'm a former dancer, and I'm not built for strength. I'm not naturally a strong person. I just have good body awareness and good flexibility. And I saw one of you coaching the bent press, talking through it as you did the beast. By the time I saw that video, I had uh, my hands, I had access to a 48 kilo. And I was like, listen, I could maybe deadlift that with one hand. Lifting it overhead is unfathomable. So seeing the fluidity of that movement, I remember I just immediately got off the computer and just went ahead and just started messing around with it. It was a 12 kilo, immediately jumped to the 16 kilo. And I think at the end of the first day, that first day I started messing with the lift, I was doing it with 62 pounds. Um, I was still wearing the gloves and the things like that, and these were horrible quality kettlebells, and I just think it's funny just to think about. It's the worse your equipment you start off with, the more you tend to appreciate when you have the nice stuff. So all that said is, I took to the lift before I even learned how to do a snatch, how to do a get up, how to move a kettlebell the proper way until I moved into strong first. And by the time I got my SFG1, I was doing 56 kilo, uh, maybe 60. But that was the only thing I really practiced. I didn't have my I call it architecture. So I was good at like twisting and kind of contorting myself, but I didn't have a whole lot of structure to fall back on. I was
Hmm.
kind of a glass cannon. I could do this one thing maybe a few times, but if one little thing went wrong,
Right.
uh, and like Arthur Saxon says, there are so many little adjustments that happen when we're doing the lift. I couldn't make those adjustments. So if I felt even a little bit of turbulence under it, oh, my delt's not built up. My tendons in my elbow aren't built up. My lower back is bent. It's flexing laterally in a crazy way, and it's not reinforced with my paraspinals. There goes the lift. So all conditions had to be right for me to do that lift back then, versus now where you give me any object, I've built up enough foundation and architecture to complete it pretty much any way I want. So that's a kind of a meandering history of my kettlebell practice.
Yeah. Um, we had a conversation, or we started a conversation in November when we first met, and you said something that uh, you compared the bent press. I think the words that you used were like an overhead deadlift.
Hmm.
And when you said that, I was like, that actually was the comment that made me think, oh, I really need to pay attention not only to what this guy can do, but how he's arriving at these places. Because I, I I totally understood what you meant because I think one of the things that there's a finite number of things that people run into troubleshooting wise with the bent press that once you understand them, it makes for real easy correction. So, for example, and this is relevant to what we're talking about now, I was on a call yesterday, literally yesterday, with a client who was working on his bent press. And I said, well, show me what you got. And he goes into, one of the Zoom call, he goes and he cleans it and he goes to get into his rear rack position. And the first thing to move was his knees in the opposite direction. And I'm like, go ahead and finish the rep. And um, within 15 minutes, most of that me talking, a little bit of that me demonstrating, and even less of that is him playing with it. He hit an all-time PR in the lift, a 2 kilo PR going from 40 to 42 on both sides because of this one minor adjustment that we made that, and it's not about the knees. It's about what's going on, up and down the chain. But it's like when Gray Cook talks about if you have an issue in a joint, don't look at that joint, look above or below it for the cause. And his issue was that he wasn't getting enough T-spine rotation, thoracic spine rotation to get into a rack, and it was coming from his knees. So instead of his elbow being behind him, if we're on a clock face and he's facing 12 o'clock, I want your elbow to be 4:30 or 5 o'clock before you ever even start that initial bend into the bent press. His was locked in at about 3 in relation to his spine, and he was using his knees to turn it rather than his spine. Once we cleared that up, boom, he's like, I have so much more room. And I'm like, yeah, you have made room to make the motion there. So
Mm-hmm.
when you said that about it being an overhead deadlift, I have for years tried to articulate that the bend in the bent press is just a hinge done diagonally. It's a diagonal, almost but not quite unilateral hinge. And if a hinge is a deadlift and a bent press is a hinge or is a hinge, then they're all the same family of movement. They're just, different cousins from different areas of the country.
Mm-hmm.
So, talk more about how you arrived at that conclusion of the overhead deadlift.
That's just something that kind of came out of my mouth. It's something that I knew. You know this from coaching.
Hmm.
Like you'll know like all the things are in there, and you're analyzing someone like, and you just blah, and it comes
Right.
out of you. It's this subconscious thing that it wasn't like, well, I'm gonna go talk to Dave and hit him with this. Oh, it wasn't really like that. I was like, yeah, we were underneath like the bars, just kind of hanging out, trying to be quiet
Hmm.
uh, during Friday night presentation, I think. And yeah, that just expressed itself. So let me kind of flank this.
Do it.
Uh, I watch a lot of arm wrestling.
Mm,
You watch arm wrestling?
I do, and or I have, and my old-time strongman mentor, Dennis Rogers, before he became a steel bending strongman, was a champion arm wrestler. So a lot of the technique and body positioning, and to use your term, architecture of setting up different feats that I have comes from him as an arm wrestler, understanding how to get into those powerful positions so that you can utilize not just muscle power, but all of the structure behind it. So, yes,
Mhm.
I'm with you.
So, I got started on Devin Larratt. Then I went to like John Berzank, Dennis Saplenkoff, all these, you can name drop all day, but it's you watch all these different guys, and like just like you and me, when you wear this pair of sunglasses, this kind of old-timey lift pair of sunglasses, you tend to see things in that shade. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like I'm watching these guys set up. All right, we're getting kind of a hook. We're loading the lat. We're kind of leading like this. What does this remind me of?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, so it's then I kind of put it together. Arm wrestling is just bent pressing run backwards. So if a bent press we're loading like this, we're getting ready to use our hip in conjunction with our lat, nailing the deltoids down, using the triceps all downstream here. With a arm wrestler, we're trying to pull in
Mm-hmm.
back like this. Well, with bent pressing, it's the same kind of idea, but we're getting away. It's the opposite of arm wrestling. So I've been saying when I age out of bent press, I'm going to go into arm wrestling, but I don't think I'm ever going to age out of bent pressing. Um, when I think of, so we're going to put a pin in that. When I was first learning how to like run a business, when I first opened Icebox, when I had my gym in Florida, I was consuming all sorts of different books, tutorials, and a big one was Starting Strength by Mark Ripito. Like that's big blue book. Most lifters have read it, and I'm almost ashamed to admit that up until that point in like early 2019, I didn't really know what a deadlift was supposed to be.
Okay.
I knew you hinged, you used your hips and the big muscles, but the way he put it is we're just trying to find the line, the shortest line, basically, a vertical line to pull. It's always, it's a law of the universe. That's the shortest distance. So it's like, okay, well, how can I apply that? This is years down the line. How can I apply that to my bench press? So when I started doing the lift, okay, I know I'm supposed to do this.
Hmm.
I know I'm supposed to like bend over and like this and this and this. Well, I was getting too far away. I was, my torso, I'm
Hmm.
hypermobile. I'm a former dancer, so I'm basically hardwired to be just extra bendy. My torso and spine were getting below parallel under the weight, and I was getting hard capped at like 56 kilos. I was trashing my QLs too, as one would expect, right? So
Yeah.
you're putting it all on the sides of your lower back. Like, okay, well, if I think of the way, and he likes to use these diagrams and all this geometry with the way he illustrates Mark Ripito his lifts, just the way he made like the right angles and the dotted lines and the geometry. Okay, well, if I just set up like almost like a deadlift, I take this idea and just put it right here, and I end up right here, right here. There's a lot of parallels I can draw between those two. Now, then I thought, well, and this came from you really, and your tutorials on it, because I watched them all religiously. Uh, what's really moving the weight? What's really happening with this press and the bent press? And it's really just holding verticality with your forearm and letting your hips do the work.
Hmm.
So it is an arm lift. You do need a lot of arm strength. Like I've had to really build my forearms and my biceps and all that up. But letting your hips do the work. It's just like coaching someone through a swing or a deadlift. Okay, you're using your back. You're using your upper shoulders are rounding. Uh, you're using too much knees. Get into a good rigid spot, get your levers and your angles set up, and let your big muscles, let the hips do all the work. These guys, we got a construction site, our hips, our hip flexors, our glutes, quads, these are big kind of carry things around grunt workers. Our rotator cuffs, wrists, knees, those are like the nerds in the office that are coordinating all the movements around the construction site. So you wouldn't have the dorks, the skinny dorks with the who crunch numbers go out there and lift heavy objects. The whole thing's going to fall apart. So put the heavy lifting parts into the big guys that are actually bred to do that heavy work. And that's when I kind of figured out, okay, as long as I have the structures there, then I can manipulate myself around it.
Hmm.
Similarly to picking something off the floor with good levers and good verticality in my shins and my forearms, not rounding. There's a whole lot in common there, more than there is apart. Thinking of it like that, shot through the ceiling as
Nice.
far as
Nice.
uh,
And that the thing that you described about leaning away from it too much, that has been I understand why, because I was, don't cite the old magic to me. I was there when it was written kind of stuff. The falling or leaning away from the weight or bending away from the weight so that we can, keep the same nomenclature there, bent press, bend away. That was
Mhm.
something that we taught and I taught for years and years and years. You're falling away from the weight. You're moving your body away from the weight. The weight stays relatively stationary, especially in terms of elevation from the ground, although it does tend to orbit a little bit around that central axis. Like if you watch you or me or anyone who's done um, hundreds and hundreds or thousands of reps of it. As we go over, the elevation stays the same, but the weight tends to move toward the unloaded foot.
Mhm.
And structurally, that makes sense because we're keeping that vertical line of support, but the middle of that line has to move from the loaded side foot in the standing rack position to the unloaded side foot once we're in that elbow extended position. And so
Mhm.
that leaning away from it, falling away from it was a way that in the early days of teaching it, like I said, I'm guilty of this myself, that we encouraged people not to press it and not to rely on elbow and triceps to elevate it. So it's move your body away from the weight. the problem that that created is that you're then moving away from the weight. And as anyone who's ever tried to pick up a sledgehammer and hold it out and lever it down to their nose or anything like that, the further away from center, we increase exponentially the amount of force required to maintain a position. And
Mhm.
so what I observed was that it's not as much falling away from the weight as it is moving the hips in a hinge the other direction and allowing as the hip flexes, allowing the spine to go more toward parallel to the ground. But if that hip doesn't go in the opposite direction of the head, like if you don't push the butt back like a standard hinge movement, then you wind up with the weight dangling not over center anymore.
Mhm.
And I cannot tell you how many times I've extended elbow dropped a weight behind me before I figured out that, okay, my hip wasn't under it far enough. And
Mhm.
so initiating the movement, once we get in that good rack position, initiating that movement by saying, hinge the hips back diagonally for me. Because of body structures, your bent press tends to be a little more toward 12 o'clock from the initial bit. Mine tends to be a little more towards, if we're facing forward and I'm going right-handed, more towards 10 o'clock. And so I'm a little more diagonal than you, but that's because of limb lengths and in relation to spine. We both
Sure.
wind up pretty well in the same spot at the end, but the track to get there is a little different because of those leverages. But that hinging of the hip under the weight and allowing that to continue with that structural support was vital for me to understand that. Like when it clicked really well. And it became one of those things that, now my reticular activating system sees that in everybody. You need to get your
Mhm.
butt further back, right? Um, but then that took me to another place that one of the cues that we used to use, and I used it for a long time, and I never really consciously stopped using it, but it evolved over time to where uh, it didn't work as well, so I didn't use it, and it just kind of went out of my vernacular with it. Was the idea of gluing your tricep to your lat.
Mhm.
And I understand that was also, along with bend away from the weight, a way to keep people from pressing it out. Um, but I see still when I go on the interwebs and I see people bent pressing and they're not able to get in a substantial amount of weight and they're blaming it on mobility. Maybe it's a mobility thing, but almost without exception, they're not getting the arm in the position initially that is most advantageous. And they're in that kind of 3 o'clock position I was talking about earlier. Whereas if we can get it further behind, we get into the truly advantageous position. And I think that the idea of gluing the tricep to the lat puts us in that 3 o'clock position ish. But if we can get the tricep behind the lat so that the lat's actually, in front of the arm, that gets us to where we want to be, which that I arrived at all of this as an explanation to simply dial down, rest your elbow on your hip.
Mhm.
Because if it's tricep glued to lat, we can have several inches of gap between the ribs, the hip, the elbow. But if we're trying to get the elbow to the hip, um, and we just turn it into a structural support that has a lot in common with a gear voice sport rack position for jerks, where
Mhm.
the elbow rests on the anterior portion of the hip rather than in the back.
Mhm.
And I had a conversation with Dennis Vasiliev in Austin about that. And like he spotted it, and we were just talking about it. It's the same principle. It's how can I stack my bones up under this weight and then move, and then because the real strength in a bent press, and I want to know your thoughts on this too. The real place where true strength is required is after the elbow straight.
Mhm.
Now
Okay,
you got to be strong enough to hold that thing in place, right?
correct. Uh, there's about five things I want to talk about. I'll make this brief.
I
So
knew this would
before,
go this way.
oh yeah, no, this is we gotta give the people what they want. And look, dude, I have the mustache now, so the shoe fits.
And
So
that mustache has, if you get some striped shorts,
I have
I
my singlet.
I
I have my
discussed this.
singlet.
I discussed this in the Taming the Bent Press book. I have photos of Saxon wearing those striped shorts. The handlebar
Mhm.
mustache plus the striped shorts combination gives you a 333% increase in ability.
Well, we'll see how a leopard print singlet does because I just got mine in the mail, and I'm not kidding. So I had read both of Saxon's books, Development of Physical Power and Textbook of Weightlifting, before you so graciously gifted me both your book, your nail that you bent, and then Sig Klein's How to Bent Press book. So, believe it or not, the all-time record holder, King Arthur, he got me to a certain point as kind of a moderate advanced bent presser.
Mhm.
Sig Klein got me to a full, just this meme of the guy whose mind's blown.
Mhm.
That's what got me to the next level.
And I'll
And
I'll say this about those two men. I have tremendous respect for both of them. King Arthur is King Arthur. Sid Klein is a better teacher,
Mhm.
and Arthur Saxon was a better um, technician or
Sure,
demonstrator.
sure. Um, and Sig Klein because Arthur had just those freak once in a century genetics for it, and that he ran all the way with it, and we're all glad he did. But
Hmm.
Sid Klein, he was probably born to be very strong, but he was no Arthur Saxon.
No,
So his tips, as far as using a heavier weight as a proportionally more regular guy, even though he looked like Sandow, he was
right,
extremely muscular and he was extremely strong. I still identify more with Sig Klein because he's not Saxon,
right.
this demigod. And him saying, hey, and one good thing about Sig Klein I like is he shared where he struggled with the bench press.
Hmm.
He said, when it comes time to actually push and lock my elbow, that's where I find the most resistance. And like you were saying, people they see this name, the bench press. Well, you're not supposed to bend, you're not supposed to press. Well, once you actually understand there is a point in your practice where you're going to start pressing that weight. And now that I'm above 170 pounds, shooting for 180 in the next month, there's 100% a freaking press in there. And
Yep,
when you're down here and we're fighting and we're at this really scary point right here, because when you get heavy, it is scary no matter what. There must be an actual press as we sink hips down in unison.
yes,
That synchronized movement, that actual side press as the butt sinks, then we drop, then we raise. That's what actually got me past one of my sticking points, which actually injured me in the past, my last big bend press run. I didn't understand that part. Um, so it's kind of like that, that bell curve.
yep,
Like there's a few memes, but someone's at the very beginning of the bell curve. Oh, the bent press is not, it's a press. It's in the name. We go up to like 50%. Bent press isn't a press. It's you're falling away from the weight. What are you talking about? I've been doing
right,
this a lot. Then we get to like the top, you know, 99 percentile. The bent press is a press. It just
yes,
depends. At a
yeah,
certain weight, if you can use a certain weight, the lift starts to change, and you really have to start. You have zero options to cheat or muscle it up. You've got to use what you've got as far as learning proper technique when you get
absolutely,
above a certain weight.
absolutely. And I think that more than any other lift, the bent press teaches, um, the bent press teaches positioning is the proper execution of the lift is either enhanced or detracted from based on the amount of weight you're using. If the weight is too light in a bent press, you can't access the full um, stacked bones architecture that is necessary for a heavy lift. I saw a well-meaning but misinformed person demonstrating a very light bent press a while back, and one of the issues that you have with the kettlebell is the further over you get, the more your hand wants to go into pronation. And if it's heavy, there comes a point when you can't back out of that. You have to dump it, if your position's off. And we've talked about this, you and I, about minimizing rotation of the helicopter with the barbell and how much more difficult that is, or a different kind of difficult. But then with the bigger kettlebell, extended center of mass, you're getting yourself in a wrist lock, all of that. But the advice that this instructor was giving was to supinate the wrist more as you're going in. And so that's fine, but when you're getting into fully extended elbow position in the bottom with a heavy weight, you cannot do that.
Mhm.
The weight will not allow it. And this person was doing this, the elbow never came in contact with the hip. And that's how I know it's not heavy, because if it's heavy relative to your body and your strength level, you don't have a choice. The elbow has to go into that hip pocket socket thing. So, yes, there absolutely is a press at the end of it. And this is like, secret high level insider kung fu that we're talking about here, because it can be quite confusing to someone when you say, well, it's not a press, you fall away from the weight, but then at the end you press,
Mhm.
you know. Uh,
Yeah, I think different rules become more applicable the further along you get. So I
mhm,
think you can use certain cues when you're first starting off. Like there's never going to be one or two one size fits all cue for this lift.
right.
And it might be part of the reason they got, to be an outmoded lift.
Mhm,
It's like, nah, we're not doing this anymore. Blah, blah, blah. Or maybe the Olympics or bodybuilder culture or whatever. But
right.
um, I know certain cues that work for someone just starting off
Mhm,
would make no sense to guys that do it like us.
right.
And something out if you asked me to coach your bench press, I wouldn't be telling you to, let's just bend to this, let's bend to the side and just keep your knuckles pushed up to mine.
Mhm,
It would be it would just be more philosophical. It would be, how are we thinking of this right now?
mhm,
What are your intentions with this lift? Are you trying to go for body weight or above?
right.
What are we actually thinking about here? So there's a lot of right answers, but there's certainly some some wrong answers too.
Yes.
And I think a lot of those wrong answers come from using too light of a weight. And I liken the bent press to like a kettlebell jerk or a barbell jerk.
Mhm,
You see someone using two 4 kilo kettlebells and you say, okay, give me a good strong jerk. You know how hard it is to do a proper jerk with super duper lightweight?
yep.
It's impossible.
Yep.
So if you give them one kettlebell that they can't really strict press, say, all
Mhm,
right, I want you to think about these things, put that overhead.
yep.
You kind of have to follow those rules.
Yep.
So putting people under safe conditions into situations where they have to follow the rules, that's what really hardwires that. It's
Yes.
like, oh, it's not going to work if I don't do it like this. Because with lighter weights, you can just kind of, okay, I think I did it. It looked
Yeah.
okay, right? Whereas, okay, this is serious now. You need to focus in and you have to think about, the way our levers are facing. Do we have good verticality? Are you following those basic rules with tension, with good
Mhm,
grit, good lat? Is your elbow over your sacrum as best it can be? Okay, now you cannot deviate. There's very little room for error when we're using heavy weight proportion to the body. And if we can get someone to that level, a lot more boxes start to get checked
true.
and a lot more lights start to light up.
Truly. And I agree with you completely. There are cues that make sense for the younger bent presser that don't apply to the you know, one who's with more experience. Um, and I scribbled down on a piece of paper over here when you were talking earlier, about the side press part, where you said that when you get down in that bottom position, as
Mhm,
as you're there, the timing of dropping the hips and extending the elbow for those last little, maybe even less than half an inch
mhm,
of movement that happens there. Um, I think that, and I'm glad you brought that up, because for me, one of the things that has been very useful in helping to communicate how to do the lift is the idea that the relationship of motion between the hip and the elbow is this. The hip is going from extension toward flexion. The elbow is going from flexion toward extension. To use
Hmm.
non-anatomical terms, you're bending your hip, you're straightening your elbow.
Hmm.
Those angles of those two joints have to change to the same degree, at the same rate, at the same time for this thing to be successful. And the heavier the weight gets, the more important it is to have that dialed in and the less room for play you have in there. And so when we're talking heavy, and heavy's relative, and it's not just relative to strength levels, it's relative to body mass as well.
Hmm.
Um, because there's plenty of guys that are 180 pounds that can deadlift 500 or 600 pounds, and 150 pounds is not heavy to them until we get them into this position. But the thing that you said that I thought was so smart was the timing of that last little bit of elbow as the hips drop underneath. It's almost, not quite, but almost explosive. You're you're
Can
you're
be.
you're you're moving slow, but you're moving slow explosively, if that makes any sense. So
Hmm.
it's some of the intention of almost like a jerk or a push
Hmm.
press during that last little minuscule bit of the range of motion, just to get it locked in. And I've never tried to articulate that before. And so a lot of what everybody's listening to, like, this is straight off the cuff conversations with two guys who've spent a lot of time underneath the bar and studying this lift and reading what the ancients said about it. But that the way you expressed that was a very important thing.
Oh, thank you. Another way it can be thought of, I'm going to keep getting out of my chair and just showing you what I'm talking about. So I call your method more of like a side fold.
Sure.
This is more of like a Saxon setup. So if we're down here, all right, we can think of that press and the bent press as pressing the shoulder to the floor
Mm-hmm.
against extremely heavy weight or immovable object, or even like a Smith bar locked into the rack.
Mm-hmm.
If I have this extremely heavy weight, I have to press this to the floor. So now if I'm here and I can get fully locked, I'm smashing this forearm, I'm going to press the hip down away from the weight. So the idea changes from, okay, we're going to hinge and focus on pushing this opposite shoulder to the floor until we get terminal extension. Now that I'm here, well, I can't just stand up like this unless it's really, really light.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm going to do is take this hip on this locked leg and press that down to the floor under the weight, chill out a second, and then drive it up. So
Yep.
it's differing versions of pressing away from the weight. Starts with shoulders. Once we get no more room down there, we can move to hips being pushed down to the floor. Then we ascend.
Yes. Yes. And I have to, as a side note to that, I have to say that I'm seeing more and more people who are demonstrating good looking bent presses on social media finish with what I call the Nieman flare, where once I never did this, I never thought about this, but this is your dancer background showing up in this. I would just stand up and hope that I look like Arthur Saxon in the book at the end with my feet shoulder width apart. You come all the way up and you bring your feet together and you extend the unloaded arm out to the side as a performer and as a showman with a strongman lineage, I so love that. And I will go on record today and from now on describing that as the Nieman flare
That
because
no, thank you. There was one guy who left a comment. He's like, "Well, you finish a lift like a Victorian era magician, showing that the lady in the box is in fact not cut in half."
yes. Yeah, which
It,
that's yeah, that's as good a segue as any to go into the recent um I'm trying to think of a Victorian era word, hubbub. I don't know. Recent stuff that's been going on the internet about the bent press and also the get up being quote unquote circus tricks. I last night went to a county fair. There's this huge county fair that happens 10, 15 minutes from my house. And there's always different shows and comedians and magicians and whatever. And one year I was the performing strongman there. I got to drive 15 minutes away from my house, and I did like 6 shows in 3 days or something like that in the August sun. It was glorious. My wife was 8 months pregnant at the time. It was fun. Um, but there was I forget what the Fearless Flores family. I may have to tag them in this. They one of the things that they did is they called it the Globe of Death, where they have the motorcycles that ride inside the 14-foot spherical cage, and you got one person standing there and two motorcycles whirling around at 40 miles an hour, and they're high-fiving each other. But the other thing they did was this acrobat bit, and I shot a video of it. I've never seen this specific thing done before, but this lady, if you can imagine a structure that has a hinge in the middle of it. So there's two parts that come up, and then a crossbar with a hinge, and then a third part that goes up that's almost the same length. And so she's probably 70 or 80 feet in the air on top of this singular pole with footrests and little places to hook in the minimal. She didn't have a harness or anything. There was just like the little circus straps that you'd run your wrist through like a dog leash. And she got up there and did some hand balancing and stuff. And then the very last thing they did is they cut the wire to it that was holding the thing up. And she does this thing where the whole thing swings down and goes back and forth 7 or 8 times before it comes to a rest at the bottom. And I'm watching it and I'm like, if the bent press is a circus trick and that's a circus trick, I am in good company.
There you go.
Because that's the thing. It's like, okay, yes, it absolutely is a circus trick. And as a circus strongman performer with a lineage that goes back to vaudeville, thank you for saying that. I don't understand the dismissal of it as a circus trick. But it is a circus trick. That's not a derogatory comment to me. And so I embrace that. Even though I know that that's not the intention behind it. And I've heard other, people say things that I can counter with that, but we'll keep it friendly in here too. But what do you think of the get up and the bent press as a circus trick?
I mean, I've personally, if okay, I went to the barber yesterday,
Mhm.
and you've got people. How do you explain this stuff to someone who maybe goes to Planet Fitness one time in their life? They know what a bench press is, treadmill.
Smith
Okay,
machine.
maybe a Smith machine. Okay, I'm a bench presser. Well, what the hell is that? It's like, all right, the cliche guy in the unitard with the barbell overhead. I do that stuff. They're like, oh, I get it. If I've got so to like an extreme, just off the street layman, someone in the grocery store, that's how I would frame it. Like,
Right.
yeah, it's this stuff is what you imagine like a cartoon character strongman to do. Oh, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, what kind of fade do you want today? If someone is a kettlebell lifter or an athlete and they're getting interested in, all right, what's this get up? What's this bench press I've been hearing about? Okay, well, basically both of those moves are grinds that require us to create moving structures underneath the kettlebell slowly. Okay, so one has to do with basically one pillar like you had talked about. And by the way, audience, I learned all this stuff from Dave Whitley. So Dave Whitley is my mentor for bench press.
Thank
So
you.
I'm happy to carry the torch. Um, if a bench press is us just creating a pillar and moving our body underneath it and raising it overhead. It's essentially a loophole in physics that we exploit.
It's how they built the
It's
pyramids.
it's we figured it out. It's not aliens, everyone. Uh, Whereas the get up is, okay, we're taking a heavy object and we're just gradually creating new structures just in a different way so we can go from laying to standing. It's just manipulation of physics that works for us. It's just finding loopholes and exploiting them. that might make sense to an economist or a mathematician, but
Right.
it's just finding how to put heavy weight overhead in the most efficient way possible. That's it.
Right.
Now, I think that's the utility for it as well. I've moved trees using the bench press before.
Absolutely.
Uh, I've gotten up off the floor with a compromised arm after an injury using the get up form.
I have
There,
I have a 7-year-old son who weighs 85 pounds, and I have done every conceivable variation of lying on the floor with a child of from 7 pounds to 80 pounds on top of me to stand up. And it's useful stuff. It really is, you know.
it's a new definition of dad strength, right?
Right, right. And side note on that, I don't know if you saw it, but a few months ago, I posted a video of the most extreme variation of the get up ever done. It's the dad get up. I dumped a bucket of Legos on a hardwood floor, laid down
Yeah,
on top of it. Yeah,
that
that's
caused a bit of an uproar.
yes,
I
yes, it
remember
did.
the comments on that.
Yeah. So you said something a minute ago about the physics involved, and I want to that which is a good lead into this question. And then after this question, we'll probably wrap it up and maybe start planning for part two because in a lot of ways, I think we have presented a bent press masterclass here without even intentionally meaning to. And I'm grateful to have someone who thinks about it similarly, but from a different angle. It's like we're both looking at the same object from different points in the room.
Love
And
that.
I'm really grateful for this conversation. And
Likewise.
to that point, I want to throw this out there. And this could probably turn into a 5-hour conversation if we were in person, right? Just this part that I'm about to say.
Hmm?
Kettlebells. Love them. Different kinds of kettlebells. Awesome. Competition versus cast iron. Barbells, dumbbells, human beings. We'll set that one as an aside because I've done human bent presses in shows before and it's fun. It's a lot of fun, but it's really difficult to practice that consistently. But barbells, dumbbells, kettlebells of both competition style and cast iron style. You and I have had some conversations via text about what this means in terms of executing the movement. I want to hear on record your experience, your thoughts on the various different implements, and let's go back and forth on that a little bit.
Absolutely. So I do all three, and I do variations within all
And
three.
if I may interrupt you before you start, there
Hmm?
was a photo or a video. I think it was a photo that you posted yourself with something relatively heavy. It was at least 68 kilos. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, that's interesting. Vertical arm doesn't apply after a certain amount of weight because of the center of mass of the kettlebell itself. And I'm
Hmm.
pretty sure it was a 68 kilo, but if you look at that and then we look at you with a 150-pound barbell, it's not the same lift anymore. It's not the
Correct.
same position. So that was the part I was thinking of when I scribbled that down on my notes earlier. So carry on.
I know exactly so it's displacement. It's you're making room for that mass. So I love this question just because I've experimented with so many different ideas in this. So to make it really brief, kettlebell, easiest to learn on, up to a certain weight. Once it becomes unwieldy, then it becomes the hardest, without a doubt. Can I bench press 80 kilos right now? Yes. Can I bench press an 80-kilo kettlebell? Probably never. My limbs aren't the right size for that. I'm not a naturally very big person. I'm 5'10". I'm average in a lot of ways with height. This is just too far out. So if you saw me doing this with a 68 kilo, just imagine how much I have to move to accommodate a bell that big.
Mhm.
So it becomes a thing of awkwardness. So kettlebell, easiest up to a certain point, then it goes logarithmic. It's
I'll
near.
I'll I'll throw this in as a tangent on that as well. With the kettlebell, because of how the handle sits in the hand, which I'm a fan of the diagonal with the thumb and forefinger into the corner, very much like a Gear Voice Boy rack,
Mhm.
as opposed to parallel to the um, finger pads there. Um, but either way, And the reason I like that is because there's less stress on the wrist itself, and there's less involvement in creating crushing grip and wrist flexion, because that's one less thing to think about. And if I can take away from the muscular exertion of crushing and flexing with the hand and allow it to have more structural support, that's more available units of energy for completing the lift.
Mhm.
But the drawback once it gets heavy is that where the ball of the kettlebell rests on the radius and the ulnar of the forearm, it literally starts to feel like if you handed somebody a broomstick and said, break this over your knee with like a rowing motion, and they would put it in like right in the reflex spot below the kneecap and pull back. That's what the center of the bones of the forearm start to feel like for me when it gets to 68 and heavier. I've done 80
Mhm.
kilos on a kettlebell twice in my life. Once I got a photo of it, but no video. And I have no interest in ever attempting to do that with a kettlebell at that weight again. 68
Mhm.
kilo kettlebell, I'll probably do that sometime later this year. But I think that's getting to the top range of what I would want to do with that kind of implement, just because it uh, it's been a long time since my clean and rack position was so inefficient that I would bruise myself, or my snatch was so inefficient that I would bruise myself. I will have, if not bruises, some soreness
Mhm.
just from holding that thing in the rack. So there's our
It makes you, yeah, it makes you feel just like you did when you were first starting to use heavier kettlebells, and it's like, oh, what's that soreness? It's
Mhm.
heavy weight your body's not used to crushing the tissues of your arm.
Mhm.
And it's almost like nostalgia because it's like, oh,
Yeah,
this is just when I first started learning. It's
yeah.
you haven't felt that in so long. And there's you can probably build up toughness like a martial arts thing where they get kicked in the nuts over and over again. Is it worth it? Probably not.
Wolf's Law is a thing, and I've experienced that in various different things. Bending steel, I would bruise my hands and be really sore. And then, a few months of practice with even less padding on bending steel, it didn't cause any issues. I've broken coconuts as part of show feet, and developing that toughness in the bones. It's possible. And like when I was practicing the coconuts, or when I was, consistently bending steel a lot because it was my freaking job, no soreness, no nothing like that. I have never, ever, ever been able to work with that 68 kilo kettlebell for more than a few reps a week and not
Mhm.
experience it, even though I would hold that rack or do those presses with that weight for extended periods of time, weeks
Mhm.
and weeks and weeks of that. And so I think that I don't know, there's something about the angle of it, maybe coming in on the flat side of the forearm, it's more compromised. Because like if you think about a two by four, right? If you were going to break a two by four, you would hit the wide side of it, not the narrow side of it to break. So maybe it's just something inherent in the physics of that. But
So
um, yeah.
no, I get what you're getting at there. Um, so it became evident after I started doing 68 kilo bench presses in like 2019 that couldn't do the 80. All right, where do we go from here? Enter the barbell. Uh, and when people see me do a barbell bench press, it's crazy heavy weight. They're like, that must be so wobbly and hard to stabilize. A little bit, but you ever see a tightrope walker?
Mhm.
They use that big old bar. It starts to become like that when you gain that lateral strength. So if I load it up, 160, 165 is far more manageable because once I master the feeling of a long, 7 foot barbell in my hand, it really doesn't change a whole lot. Like the kettlebell certainly changes the size of the implement. Uh, as that it becomes greater, it becomes so much harder because you have to work around it basically. Barbell is immutable. It's always going to be the same kind of feeling, just with more weight. So I would say after a certain point, switches to barbell being easiest. Just for me though, dumbbell is right in the middle for me. I use plate loaded dumbbell, which is what I'm going to hit my 200-pound bench press later on this year with, just because of portability. My gym is in my car. It's a good middle point. I don't want to have a bunch of heavier kettlebells in my car, even though I do that side by side, front back with kettlebell, which is a totally different story.
Completely different
Uh,
animal.
It's totally different. I don't know if you tried it before, but
Oh yeah.
it
Yeah.
yeah, so it's just a different feeling. It's very much a down force. Uh, our friend Scott Crystal, who's a good friend of mine who bench presses as well, he just said your start point is so low, and doing that side by side clamp with the handles. I'm getting a little off topic here. That's what really hammered home that idea of, okay, once I get all the way locked, I'm pancaked. I've accepted that the weight is going to flatten me into my shoulder started getting into my inner thigh. That's how I found that range of motion. That's where I learned how to press hips down, then ascend. Because this start point is all the way down here, and I have way less workable space. Can't start here. Has to be here. But dumbbell is still legit terrifying. There's this huge kind of recalcitrant, obstinate mass that's jangling above your head.
Hmm.
But at the same time, you can get used to anything. So
Yeah.
uh, I would say dumbbell is quite awkward, like a really heavy kettlebell, but
Hmm.
not as awkward as a kettlebell of that weight of the dumbbell would be.
Yeah. And I've
Differences.
I've noticed obviously there's a to go back to the kettlebell thing for a moment, there's distinct difference between um like if I grab a 32 kilo, I've got some competition style and I've got some old cast iron first generation dragon door pedals. Pretty much the same. The thickness of the handle's a little bit different, but not enough to affect the lift itself. If we do 40 kilos competition versus cast iron, it's more noticeable. At 48 kilos, it's very noticeable because again, that center of mass is going further and further away from the column support, which is the whole deal, right? Um,
Mhm.
and I've I'm a fan of your long handled dumbbell stuff that you've been doing lately. It puts me it calls back up to me oh what's his name? Al Beinert,
330.
330
He was in Detroit too.
with the Chuck Taylors. With the
Hmm.
Chuck Taylors and the Rocky
That one
Balboa
picture
sweat.
of him just leaning back into it.
Uh-huh.
I
Hmm.
know Albiner. Yep.
Yeah. For anybody who doesn't know, if you, I'm not sure, is it Beinert, Al Beinert? And he did, I want to say it was over 300 pounds on this weird Paul Anderson looking thing that exists. I would call it a long dumbbell. It's maybe 4 feet long. And if you've ever seen the video, this isn't a bent press, but it's phenomenal, the lifting of the weight overhead. And it's Paul Anderson with a 300-pound dumbbell knocking out 2 reps in a like a natural press manner of what Bud Jeffries would call a natural press. And what kind of conversations could you and I have, Peter, if we spent some time talking about the press continuum from strict to bent? We could go on for days. But
We can
yeah,
go all day.
we could go all day, son. Um,
I'm trying to find this picture of Albiner, but
Yeah, I'll dig it up. I'm sure that there's 2 photos that I remember. There's one where he's leaning back trying to rack the thing, and then there's the other one where he's in the lockout position about to stand up. And his style, just looking at that single photo, I don't think I've ever seen a video of him, but his style reminds me a lot of James Fuller
yeah.
with that. It's more even more lateral than mine. Mine, I would say mine's kind of in the middle between you and James. James tends to be much more side leaning in his bent press, and yours is
Hmm.
more forward leaning. And like we said way back at the beginning of this conversation, that is based on body awareness and individual leverages and figuring out for yourself where the best path is. There are principles that apply, but the individual mileage may vary in
Sure.
accordance with that. So,
And dear viewer, if you want to see the most insane rotation with a massive weight, look up Paul Belange Belanger. I think is he's a Quebecois guy,
mm,
but he got the closest to beating Arthur Saxon. I believe he did 360, but
mm,
he got his shoulder between his legs. He's completely wrapped around his opposite side. It's inhuman the amount of rotation that guy got with double body weight
yeah,
overhead.
yeah. And it is time to wrap up, but I feel like we would be remiss if in wrapping up, I didn't at least mention the name Harold Ansorge, who have you read his book?
Mm-mm.
Oh, Sid Klein wrote How to Bent Press. Harold Anselwich wrote How to Bent Press Correctly.
Ooh,
Ooh.
burn.
Yeah. And so I don't know if there was beef between the two of them or not, but that book, I got a copy of it from Super Strength Books, Bill Hemmer's site. And it's worth looking at. He's got an interesting way of racking the barbell where you find center with and I'm holding on to center. Let's say I'm doing a right-handed lift. I'm holding on to center right here. Then I bring my left hand in right below it and let go with the right hand, rest it on the shoulder, and either hold the bar down below, or if it's shorter, hold the plates. I think it's hold the bar. I played with it a little bit, but it just wasn't really my bowl of gravy. Bring it up into position and then bring the hand in and then get in there. And
Well,
I think he was right-handed, but I think one of his claims to fame was that he was one of, if not the only guy at the time to do a left-handed bent press of 300 pounds.
goodness
So
gracious.
non-dominant hand. So he was nuts. Yeah. Again,
But just yeah, the
circus.
fatigue you get from just getting into rack under duress like that, that
Yeah.
can work around
Yeah.
that. That's really
Yeah.
fascinating.
And we didn't even talk about this with getting a barbell to the shoulder and the distinct differences between the way you do it and the way that I do it.
Wait, just tune in next time,
Tune in
folks.
next time, folks. Well, Peter, I truly, truly appreciate you being on, and this this is some of the happiest conversation topic stuff that I ever have with anybody, and so I appreciate you. I appreciate you being on the show. I appreciate you taking the information that was out there and running with it and putting your own stamp on it and spreading the gospel of the bent press to the masses. And thank you. Just thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me. We'll do it again soon. All right.
All right, this is Dave Whitley, Strength Beyond Strength, and we'll see you next time.